For every famous story that made it into history books, hundreds didn't. Like the first cat to go to space and live to tell the tale, or Japan's own Schindler. And let's never forget the two young women who fought to the death defending their city from the Nazis. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 fascinating facts history forgot to mention. But before we get rolling, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm you've got good taste in videos. Alright, let's get into it. 25. The first cat in space. Before humans made it to space, a small stray cat from Paris beat most of them to it. Her name was Felicette, and in 1963 France launched her on a suborbital flight. The data showed that while her heart rate spiked during liftoff, she stabilized once she hit weightlessness. So she actually did better than most humans would have. When her capsule parachuted down, Felicette was alive and well, the first and only cat to ever go to space and make it back. But this story isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Felicette was euthanized a few months later so that scientists could study her body, which is, I know, a really terrible ending to this entry, but it does get a tiny bit better. For decades, she was forgotten, while Laika, the space dog, became a household name. Felicette didn't even have her own Wikipedia page until November 2010. That changed when British creative director named Matthew Serge Guy stumbled upon her story while researching some of the first space missions. Shocked that no one had honored her, he launched a Kickstarter in 2017 to fund a memorial. Space enthusiasts, animal lovers, and science fans from around the world pitched in. The campaign surpassed its goal, and in 2019, a bronze statue of Felicette, sitting proudly on top of a globe, was unveiled at the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. 24. A tree almost triggered World War III. Paul Bunyan is the legendary giant lumberjack from American folklore who carved out the Great Lakes and the Grand Canyon with his bare hands. Now, what a lot of people don't actually know is that there was a real military operation named after him, and it almost started a war. In 1976, a poplar tree in the Korean demilitarized zone was blocking the view between two of the United Nations checkpoints. A team was sent in to cut it down, but North Korean soldiers attacked them, killing 2 men in the process. In response, the US launched Operation Paul Bunyan and sent a massive air and ground convoy to finish cutting down that same tree under heavy guard. The mission was completed without further violence, but it would forever be known as the Axe Murder Incident. 23. The one vote purchase. We all know that Alaska was bought by the United States from Russia in 1867, but it didn't almost happen at all. The deal was approved by just one vote in the US Senate. Secretary of State William H. Seward negotiated the purchase for $7.2 million, and people at the time mocked it because everyone mistakenly believed that Alaska was nothing more than frozen wasteland. That single vote ended up securing one of the richest territories in the country, full of oil, gold, and fisheries. Decades later, Alaska became a crucial defense point during World War II and the Cold War, and today it's celebrated for its natural beauty and resources. 22. The first genocide of the 20th century. Between 1904 and 1908, decades before the Holocaust, German colonial forces carried out one of the first genocides of the modern era in what is now Namibia. Tens of thousands of Herero and Nama people were killed in what became known as the Herero and Namaqua Genocide. Germany had taken control of the region in 1884, seizing land and livestock and forcing local communities into hard labor. When the Herero, led by Chief Samuel Maherero, rose up against German rule in 1904, Berlin sent General Lothar von Trotha to crush the rebellion. Trotha's response was brutal. He issued an order to wipe out the Herero completely, saying that every man should be shot and every woman and child should be left to die in the desert. By the time it was over, more than 60,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama had died through executions, starvation, and concentration camps. 21. Japan's Schindler. In the summer of 1940, the streets outside the Japanese consulate in Kaunas, Lithuania, filled with Jewish refugees desperate to escape Nazi-occupied Europe. Inside, Japan's consul, Chiune Sugihara, faced a decision that would change thousands of lives. His government had forbidden him to issue transit visas, but he did it anyway. Ignoring Tokyo's strict orders, Sugihara handwrote visa after visa for days on end, sometimes hundreds a day, allowing thousands of Jews to flee through the Soviet Union and Japan to safety. He kept writing until he and his family were forced to leave Lithuania. He saved thousands of lives, and in 1984, Israel named him Righteous Among the Nations. He was the only Japanese citizen to receive this honor. 20. Sports fans gone wild. By the 6th century, Constantinople was the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, wealthy, powerful, and steeped in Roman and Greek tradition. But all that stability nearly disintegrated over something as trivial as a chariot race. The two biggest teams, the Blues and the Greens, weren't just sports rivals, they were political factions. And when tempers flared during a race in 532 CE, the argument turned into a citywide uprising. The Nika riots raged for days. Fires swept through the streets. The Hagia Sophia was destroyed, and countless neighborhoods were leveled. Justinian eventually sent in his troops to cut down the rebels, ending the uprising once and for all. When the dust settled, over 30,000 people were dead. 19. The Whiskey Rebellion. In the 1790s, the United States was still figuring out what kind of country it wanted to be when trouble broke out in western Pennsylvania. Locals there were furious over a new liquor tax imposed by the federal government. The man behind it was none other than Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton, who wanted to pay off the national debt by taxing products like whiskey. Hamilton also saw it as a way to prove the young federal government had real authority, but farmers and distillers in the region saw it differently. They refused to pay and took up arms in protest. In 1794, President George Washington sent troops to put down the rebellion, and his forces prevailed. But the real impact went far beyond whiskey. The rebellion marked the first time the federal government enforced its own laws with military power, setting a precedent that shaped how it would govern from then on out. 18. America's Deadliest Wildfire. In 1871, the small Wisconsin town of Peshtigo went up in flames. That night, October 8th, winds whipped through the forests, turning a few brush fires into a firestorm so massive it made its own weather. People said it sounded like a train barreling toward them, only this train was made of fire. By morning, the whole town was gone. Over 1 million acres burned, and up to 2,500 people died. The fire was so intense that cows and horses tried to escape by running into the river, and some people drowned trying to follow them. It should have been national news, but the Great Chicago Fire broke out the exact same night, and the big city story grabbed every headline. Peshtigo somehow got forgotten, even though it's still the deadliest wildfire in American history. 17. The Phantom Barber. Something weird was going on in Pascagoula, Mississippi in the summer of 1942. Women were waking up around town to find their hair had been cut off by someone who snuck into their houses while they slept. The first reports were from Edna Marie Heidel and Mary Evelyn Briggs, and pretty soon, police had their hands full. Then, in August, police arrested a local chemist named William Dolan and said the mystery was solved. Dolan denied everything, but once he was locked up, the break-ins stopped. Whether that means they really caught the Phantom Barber or just got lucky, nobody knows. 16. France's perfect timing. France gave women the right to vote on April 29, 1945, just as the war in Europe was reaching its end. For the first time, the other half of the population finally had a voice in shaping their nation's future. Why is that important? Because the very next day, Adolf Hitler met his end. While women across France looked toward a new era of freedom, the man whose ideology had crushed so much of Europe took his last breath in a Berlin bunker. It's hard to imagine a stranger coincidence, or a clearer sign that one world was ending while another was just beginning. 15. The Forgotten Gold Rush. In 1799, a 12-year-old named Conrad Reed was poking around on his family's farm in North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte. While digging, he came across a strange yellow rock that turned out to be a gold nugget. The family didn't think much of it, and ended up using it as a doorstop for several years. 4 years later, Conrad's father, John, brought the rock to a jeweler to find out what it was worth. The jeweler immediately recognized gold when he saw it and offered Reed $3.50 for it, which would be around $70 today. Reed agreed, not realizing he had just handed over a small fortune. It wasn't long before he realized his mistake, though. That same year, he joined forces with a few nearby farmers to search their land more carefully. They struck gold again, finding a massive 28-pound nugget on the property. Word spread quickly, and soon newspapers were talking about the discovery. Farmers from across the region started digging shallow mines once harvest season ended, hoping to get lucky too. By 1820, most of the surface gold had been taken, and local miners began bringing in experienced workers from Cornwall, England to dig deeper shafts. The new tunnels produced even more gold, silver, and quartz through the 1820s and 1830s. By the mid-1840s, the rush had slowed down and the mines were nearly empty. Still, North Carolina's gold boom left a lasting mark. The UNC Charlotte's mascot, the 49er, still pays tribute to the area's mining past. 14. The Cursed Nuclear Submarine. K-27 was supposed to be the pride of the Soviet Navy. Launched in 1958, it carried 2 liquid metal-cooled reactors that were smaller, faster, and more powerful than anything else underwater. It even stayed submerged for 50 days straight, a record at the time. Then came May 24th, 1986. Hey, my birthday, just a few years before I was born. One of those reactors failed, and radiation flooded the submarine. The detector had been turned off for some reason, and by the time it was switched on, the levels were off the charts. The crew had no choice but to head home through a radioactive cloud. All 144 men were exposed for over 5 hours. 9 died. The K-27 was quietly decommissioned in 1979 and dumped in the Kara Sea a few years later. It's never been recovered, and experts are still monitoring it due to radiation risk. 13. The Wrong Man. Jersey was filled with fear from 1961 onwards, as women and children were attacked and homes were robbed at night. The island's hunt for answers landed on Alphonse Le Gastillois. Even though the police had no evidence, the community made him their scapegoat. He was arrested briefly, his home torched, and in 1961, he fled to live alone on an isolated reef where he stayed for the next 14 years. Meanwhile, the actual predator, Edward Paisnell, later known as the Beast of Jersey, kept killing. Paisnell was finally captured and convicted for 13 counts of assault in 1971, confirming Le Gastillois' innocence at last. He returned to Jersey after Paisnell's conviction, but never fully reintegrated into society and remained a recluse until his death in 2012. 12. Mariya Kovshova and Nina Polivanova. Mariya Kovshova and Nina Polivanova joined a self-defense regiment in Moscow 1941 as the Germans pushed toward the city. Both were loyal to the Soviet cause and deeply hated the invaders, especially after the bombings that targeted civilians. Kovshova started out as a control dispatcher before moving into a sniper unit. Polivanova worked as her spotter and often picked off enemy soldiers herself. After the Battle of Moscow, they were sent to the Northwestern Front, fighting south of Leningrad. Kovshova trained other snipers, and together their unit dealt heavy damage to the German forces in the Novgorod region. By August 1942, near the village of Sutoki Byakovo, their group was nearly wiped out by machine gun and artillery fire. When only the 2 of them were left, they kept fighting until they ran out of ammunition. Then, they pulled the pins from their grenades and waited for the Germans to advance. They threw them as the soldiers rushed in, killing themselves in the blast. No one knows for sure if they took any Germans with them. 11. We found an 1800-year-old lost letter. In the year 214, a young Egyptian soldier named Aurelius Polion was serving with the Roman legion in what is now Hungary, about 1,600 kilometers from home. The thing that haunted him most wasn't battle, it was his family's silence. Polion wrote letter after letter to his family back in Egypt, begging them to reply. "I sent 6 letters to you," he said, "but you never wrote to me." He thought they'd forgotten him. Still, he promised, "The moment you have me in mind, I shall come to you so that you may know that I am your brother." The letter was written in Greek on papyrus and somehow ended up back in Egypt, where it was found centuries later among the Oxyrhynchus papyri, a massive collection of ancient documents that ended up being preserved in the desert sands. It had never been delivered. 10. George Washington's 6-month loophole. When Pennsylvania passed the Gradual Abolition Act in 1780, it was one of the first real cracks in the system of slavery. The law said anyone enslaved in the state for more than 6 months could legally claim their freedom. So, when George Washington moved to Philadelphia as president, that rule technically applied to him too. But Washington wasn't about to lose his labor force. He simply worked around the law by sending his enslaved workers back to Virginia every few months to reset the clock. Sometimes Martha Washington even took them along just to make it look normal. In letters to his secretary, he made it clear that no one was to talk about what he was doing. 9. The other scandalous founding father. Since I'm on the subject of founding fathers, another one worth mentioning is Gouverneur Morris, the man who literally wrote the words, "We the people." He was smart, loud, and famously, shall we say, reckless, especially when it came to the ladies. He had a peg leg, supposedly from leaping out a window during an affair, though that part's a myth. What isn't a myth, though, is how he died. In 1816, at 64, he tried to perform surgery on himself to fix a urinary blockage using a few things from around the house. Yes, he operated on his own private parts. It didn't work, and he passed away shortly thereafter. 8. The Lusitania's secret cargo. Many people believe the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 is what led the United States into World War I. It didn't. The attack killed 1,198 people, including 128 Americans, and caused international outrage, but the US stayed neutral for 2 more years. President Woodrow Wilson wanted to keep America out of Europe's war, and few realized the Lusitania was secretly carrying ammunition for the British military. Germany suspected it, and when they torpedoed the ship, they called it a justified strike. Washington publicly condemned the attack, but privately stayed quiet. It wasn't until 1917, after more ships were sunk, that the US finally declared war. 7. Japan's balloon bombs. In 1945, near the end of World War II, a group of kids and their Sunday school teacher headed out for a picnic near Bly, Oregon, when they found something strange in the woods. A large balloon with ropes and metal parts. Before anyone could react, it exploded. 26-year-old Elise Mitchell, who was pregnant, and 5 children were killed instantly. They were the only civilians to die from enemy action on the US mainland during the entire war. The bomb had drifted across the Pacific from Japan, carried by the jet stream. Japanese engineers had built thousands of these balloon bombs, hoping they'd start forest fires or cause panic. The US military censored all reports of them to prevent mass fear, so no one knew the danger. By the time the truth came out, the war was almost over, and the story got buried. 6. The Sultana Disaster. Just weeks after the Civil War ended, a steamboat called the Sultana left Vicksburg, Mississippi, carrying more than 2,000 Union soldiers who had just been freed from Confederate prison camps. It was built for about 376 passengers, but greed got in the way. Officers were paid by the head to get the men home, so they packed the decks until the ship could barely stay afloat. In the early hours of April 27, 1865, the boilers burst north of Memphis, ripping the Sultana apart and setting the Mississippi River on fire. Between 1,200 and 1,800 people died, more than on the Titanic, making it the deadliest maritime disaster in U.S. history. And yet, most Americans have never heard about it. 5. An eclipse stopped a war. The Lydians and the Medes had been killing each other for 5 years when something strange happened on May 28, 585 BCE. As they warred on the battlefield, a solar eclipse turned the sky black, and both sides froze. To the soldiers, it looked like the gods themselves were angry at their incessant battles. Nobody thought about the Greek astronomer Thales, who actually already predicted it would happen. Once the daylight came back, neither army wanted to test their luck. The leaders met, signed a peace treaty, and even sealed the deal with a royal marriage. It's one of the only ancient battles we can nail down to the date thanks to the eclipse. 4. The Anthrax bomb plot. In 1942, British scientists at Porton Down dreamed up something called Operation Vegetarian. The idea was to wipe out Germany's food supply by dropping millions of linseed cattle cakes laced with anthrax spores. By 1943, they'd already made around 5 million of them, all set to be scattered across German pastures so infected cattle would spread the disease through the food chain. They tested the plan on Greenland Island off Scotland, and it worked. A little too well. The sheep died within days, and the island was so badly contaminated it stayed off limits for decades. The cakes were never used. The war turned in the Allies' favor after D-Day, and the whole operation was scrapped. But if it had gone ahead, parts of Germany might still be unlivable today. 3. Operation Cat Drop. In the 1950s, malaria was tearing through Borneo, so the World Health Organization stepped in with what sounded like a smart plan. Spray DDT to kill the mosquitoes. It worked. For a minute. Then the DDT wiped out wasps and geckos, poisoned the food chain, and killed off a lot of cats. Without cats, rats took over. And to fix the mess, the Royal Air Force launched Operation Cat Drop. They literally packed cats into crates, loaded them onto planes, and parachuted them into the jungle. It actually worked. The rats were wiped out, and malaria rates dropped again. So they fixed the problem. But let's just say the whole cats with parachutes idea never made a comeback. 2. Bullets to save the Parthenon. There are some stories everyone deserves to know. For example, like how during the siege of Athens in 1821, the Parthenon almost became collateral damage. The Ottoman soldiers trapped on the Acropolis were running out of bullets, so they started melting down the lead from the Parthenon's columns for ammunition. When the Greek rebels outside saw what was happening, they had to stop it. So they sent word to the Ottomans that they'd hand over their own bullets if it meant saving their monument. The Turks agreed, and for a short while, both sides stopped fighting to keep the Parthenon standing. It was one of the few times in war where everyone, even the enemy, decided history was worth more than a few rounds of lead. 1. The Great Whiskey Fire. In 1875, Dublin's Liberties District turned into a river of fire. A bonded warehouse storing about 5,000 barrels of whiskey went up in flames. As the heat burst the casks, burning liquor poured through the streets. Witnesses said the flow was 2 feet wide and 6 inches deep, stretching for hundreds of meters. People rushed out with cups, hats, and even their boots to scoop it up. 13 of them died, not from burns or smoke, but from drinking straight from the gutter. Livestock were killed, homes were burned, and one dog that lapped up the fiery whiskey went mad and leaped from a window. The Dublin Fire Brigade fought the blaze for hours and stopped it from swallowing entire blocks. By the next morning, the whiskey was gone, the streets were blackened, and Liberties carried the hangover for years. And that's a wrap. Now, our next video digs into 25 common myths about ancient civilizations debunked. For example, you've probably heard the one about the Library of Alexandria burning in a single fire, or that Pandora opened a box. Yeah, none of that's true. The link for that video will appear about right here shortly. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, we'll catch you later.